cannot understand that somebody must kill a child like that.
How somebody could have done this to her. She was beautiful inside and out.
We appealing the community to help us to find this person who can do something horrible like that.
Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me here again today. Last week we spoke about the Jesus Killer, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it somewhere up here for you. But today we're going to talk about the brutal murder of Franziska Blöchliger. And I remember this case unfolding kind of live in front of us, and it was quite hectic and it was very, very disturbing and disgusting. Before we do get into this case, I do just want to give a warning that this case is not meant for children. But that being said, let's get into it.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Franziska at the time lived in Cape Town, South Africa, and she went to a very prestigious high school and lived in a very affluent suburb of Tokai. She was known to be a very happy and outgoing and very driven young lady. Franziska had a younger sister named Sophia, and obviously her mom and dad. So I'm not sure if Franziska was going to move to Switzerland that year, but she had dreams of eventually going and studying in Switzerland because her dad was Swiss, and I think that's where that connection came from. So she was trying to do kind of a exchange program with Switzerland. Then on the 7th of March 2016, Franziska and her mom were wanting to fetch her sister after school like every day, and Franziska was kind of like, okay, I'm a bit bored, let's go out for a walk, let's do something fun while we wait for Sophia to finish school. So her mom agreed, they had time to kill, and they decided to take the dog for a walk and go to Tokai Forest. So looking at Tokai Forest, it is quite a big forest, even though it is kind of in the middle of all these suburbs. Many people go there for walking the dogs, running, cycling, those kind of things. But it is also used as a thoroughfare for some workers or laborers that work in the surrounding wine farms in the area. So they'll use this forest to walk through it in order to get main roads or anywhere where they can take transport back home. So mom and Franziska get to Tokai Forest, they park the car and they start walking their dog. Franziska then asks her mom maybe if she could start running because she's kind of bored, she's over the walking and she prefers running, she loves running. So her mom agrees and they decide that they will meet at 3:30 back at the car. So they got there at 3 and basically they had half an hour to kill, and Franziska would run and the mom would walk. So Franziska says, cool, she puts in her earphones, she puts some music on her phone, tucks it in her pocket, and off she starts running. Then 3:30 rolls around, Franziska's mom gets back to the car, puts the dog in the car, and she starts waiting for Franziska, but Franziska doesn't arrive. She's kind of getting irritated because she has to pick up Sophia, and at the time Sophia was quite young. So obviously Franziska's mom wanted to get to Sophia as quickly as she could to not leave her kind of lurking around the school grounds waiting for them. So Franziska's mom starts calling Franziska, calling, and she's not answering the phone. So eventually Franziska's mom decides to call her dad, and she's complaining to her dad that Franziska's still not here and she needs to pick up Sophia. So the dad says, just calm down, it's fine, go pick up Sophia, she's just up the road, like 5 minutes away, come back and Franziska will then maybe be finished with whatever she was doing and you can go home. So the mom's like, okay, fine. So she gets in the car and she drives off to fetch Sophia. Sophia and the mom now arrive back at Tokai Forest around 10 minutes after she left. So the mom gets out the car and I think Sophia's in the car, I'm not quite sure, but she keeps calling Franziska and she's still not answering. And now panic sets in for the mom because this is weird. She had an extra 10 minutes and she's not usually this disobedient. She usually listens to her mom, basically. So Franziska's mom calls her husband and now he's worried as well because this is also weird behavior from Franziska. So they end up calling the police, and the Kirstenhof police officers decide to come and have a look in the forest. So when the police arrived there, they spoke to Franziska's mom, and at the time then Franziska's dad had also arrived. And they were then talking and they decided to send out a search party now because this was very odd behavior for the young lady. And a lot of people in the Tokai community got involved as well. And this included Franziska's friends from school and their parents. So they started having a look for her, and then it eventually got bigger and bigger. Eventually a lot of people in the community came that hardly knew her as well. So like I said earlier, Tokai Forest spans quite a large distance in the suburbs. And while the search party was happening, say, on this side of Tokai Forest, a lady was entering from another part because it's not a closed off forest. You can enter from anywhere. So another lady was entering from this side, and she was a 56-year-old nurse at the time named Yvonne Alger, and she was walking her dog. So she got into the forest, walking her dog, and they go quite into the forest, and she let the dog off the lead, and the dog's running, and she sees the dog focused on a particular spot within the forest. And as she's getting closer, she just thinks that it's this white plastic bag that's kind of caught to the bushes. So she doesn't really think much of it, but she's calling her dog away from it because she doesn't want the dog to eat anything strange. So the dog's still continuously looking at this white plastic bag, and Yvonne then decides to go closer and pull her dog away from the white plastic bag. But as Yvonne gets closer to where her dog is, she realizes that this is actually a body. So Yvonne Alger calls the police, and Kirstenhof police then move from their search party there to where the body had now been found, and they also call an ambulance. Once the police do arrive, they do confirm from pictures from the family that this is 16-year-old Franziska Blöchliger. Franziska was robbed of all of her possessions, which included her iPhone. Some sources say that she had a ring on her finger that was also taken, her earphones were taken, and everything she had on her basically. Sadly, the perpetrator who mugged her in the forest did not stop there. She was also sexually assaulted and strangled or suffocated to death. So remember, Franziska's parents were on the other side of Tokai forest, and the police had kind of moved away from them to find out what Yvonne had found. And when they did find Franziska's body, she was taken in the ambulance to a hospital that was quite close to Tokai. And the parents were then informed that they found Franziska, but they need to follow them to the hospital. And Franziska's parents obviously thought, okay, maybe she's okay, something happened to her, maybe she broke a leg or something, and they followed the police, sadly, to hear the horrific news of what happened to their daughter. Now, when police had to go back to this crime scene and try and find any evidence, there was none. There were footprints because there was obviously a struggle, and it looked like Franziska did fight back. Some sources do say that police found bodily fluid or DNA on Franziska's body, but other sources say that it may have been ruined from the ambulance, touching her face, because the ambulance did say that her body was still very warm when they found her. So they're not sure if she may have just passed away or they just found her recently after she just passed away. But basically, some sources say that the ambulance may have ruined the fluid that was found on her body because they were trying to save her life. So that could have been tampered with in that way. But basically, police had very, very little evidence to go off with this case.
Her body was found in the Tokai forest in the southern peninsula. Flowers and messages of support lined the fence. The family says they are struggling to come to terms with what happened.
But police did hit the ground running with this case, and they tried to find any evidence they could from the little morsels that they had of evidence. And one of the things that they looked into instantly was Franziska's iPhone. This person who had mugged her and robbed her and potentially murdered her did not switch the phone off. So they went and tracked her iPhone. Around 10 kilometers away from Tokai or Tokai Forest is a suburb called Westlake. And in Westlake, there is an informal settlement where some of the laborers who work on the farms in Constantia, Tokai, all those areas. So police have now headed over to Westlake, and they eventually tracked the iPhone to a house belonging to a man named Howard Oliver. So police then take Howard Oliver into custody, as well as another man who is in his house named Jerome Moses. So both Jerome and Howard have their rights read to them, and they are taken into custody and they sit in jail for a few days. Eventually, Jerome is only charged with possession of stolen goods, which belonged to Franziska, and Howard was actually the person that the police were very interested in. So Howard had now been kept in jail for quite some time, and during the time that this horrible and brutal murder happened of Franziska, Howard was working in a vineyard in Constantia at the time. Howard Oliver had a very troubled upbringing. He was very violent. He turned into a drug addict, and he tried to feed his habit however he could. And this sometimes led to violence, and this was kind of the environment that he was constantly brought up in and was surrounded by. So around a year after Franziska Blöchliger's murder had taken place, Howard Oliver's trial now began. At first, Howard Oliver pled not guilty to any of the charges laid upon him. Eventually, Howard Oliver wrote many pages as a confession of what he had done that day on the 7th of March 2016. And so now let's get into what Howard Oliver said happened that day. Howard said he was working on the farm and he was not feeling well, or he was just kind of in a fight with his boss. So he left the farm early on that day and he started walking through Tokai Forest and quite deep into Tokai Forest because he had just bought some mandrax, which is a drug, and he wanted to now smoke the mandrax in the forest. So Howard had just finished smoking this mandrax and he happened to see Franziska running past. And he's watching her as she's running past and he notices that she stops and she takes out an iPhone and she starts maybe changing a song or doing something like that on her phone. He then sees, okay, cool, easy opportunity, I want that phone. And he waits for her until she runs past him. And Howard kind of crouches down into the bushes and he waits for Franziska to particularly run past him. And as she does, he grabs her from behind and he starts strangling her on the floor. Franziska puts up a massive fight and he was unable to constantly hold her arms as she kept hitting, scratching and fighting for her life. Franziska then stops moving for a bit and he thinks, okay, cool, she's maybe passed out from what I just did. So he then flips Franziska onto her stomach and he then takes her shoelaces, ties it around her arms and her legs, and then he proceeds to pull down her pants and sexually assault her. And Howard is busy sexually assaulting her while she is lying face down in the dirt. Once Howard has finished sexually assaulting her, he notices that she is no longer breathing. Howard Oliver then leaves Franziska lying like that in the dirt. He gets up and he takes her phone and whatever else she had on her and he runs away out of Tokai Forest. He then sells Franziska's phone to someone at a bus or train station for 200 Rand, which is clearly all he thought Franziska's life was worth. And this came out of Howard Oliver's confession, and he was subsequently sentenced to 2 life sentences in a South African prison. So basically he will spend the rest of his life in prison. And when reading up on this case, there were a few conflicting articles. Some said that there were 2 men or even 3 men in the forest with Howard at the time, but there was no substantial evidence to prove this according to these articles, and they were just kind of hearsay. There was also quite a sad article that I read, which may or may not be true, but they believed that Franziska had actually died because of her face being in the soil or dirt while he was sexually assaulting her, and she was unable to move her face in order to breathe. But we don't know. I don't know. I wasn't the EMT on site. But that is the very tragic case of Franziska Blöchliger. It is incredibly sad that we often have very brutal and horrific crimes that happen for technology, or because someone has a cell phone. Criminals here take it sometimes to an extreme. And I think people do that all over the world. But it's just sad when such young people are taken over a cell phone. People still do go to Tokai Forest and hang ribbons on the side of the fence or put flowers in memory of Franziska. I don't think that her parents stay in South Africa anymore, nor does Sophia, her younger sister. I think once everything happened and after the trial, I think that they left to Switzerland. I could be wrong if they're still staying there, but I think they are. But that is a very tragic case of Franziska Blöchliger, and I hope you were entertained by this case, and I will see you again next week. Bye.